All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Urban Ag Hour. We are so excited that you were able to join us this morning and hear from an amazing speaker today. The Urban Agriculture Production Small Scale and Beginning Farmer Program is partnered with USDA, NRCS, and FSA to offer this series. And today we will hear from Phillip Jacquez, who is the NRCS Urban Conservationist. I will now hand it over to you, Phil, and let you take it away from here.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good morning, everybody. Um, I'm going to talk to you today about planning considerations for high tunnels. And I'm not tech savvy, so bear with me. There we go. And so the focus is going to be for urban small scale farms. And anybody might say, well, what's urban? Anything in a metropolitan or city area? The size could be anywhere from a quarter acre to 5 acres. Some people think small scale farms can be about 5 acres up to about 40 acres. But the purpose is to look at the small scale production, whether you're in an urban or rural environment. So if you are not familiar with Natural Resources Conservation Service, it's one of 29 agencies under the United States Department of Agriculture. We're non-regulatory, and we tend to be a technical service agency with all our programs being voluntary. So if you have some specific technical questions on soils, crop production, irrigation systems, then we could be a potential partner to call. Of course, there's also your cooperative extension agents, and the Center for Urban Smart Agriculture can also assist you with those same questions. We work with staff throughout the landowners throughout the state, local units of government, NGOs, nonprofits, and the purpose is to address your natural resource concerns. We also partner with natural resource conservation districts and soil water conservation districts to be aware of local concerns in those particular district areas, and they are located throughout the state as well. This map just briefly shows that NRCS in Arizona has organized into 8 teams, and as you can see, we are located from Fredonia all the way over to Yuma. So let's talk about high tunnels. Well, some interest I usually hear from most folks when they contact me or I get referrals via email or phone calls is they want to extend a growing season. But one of the things that you have to understand from an NRCS perspective or a planner that's coming out to assist you is one of the main resource concerns we'll be looking at is improving plant health and vigor. So work with us there as you can see, some of the crops on one side of this high tunnel going in appear to be in fairly good shape. So we may ask for information from you on your production techniques, if you've seen any issues in terms of plant production, and we might be able to visually assess it because that's what we need to know as part of our planning process. So some of the resource concerns we can also look at that can go with a high tunnel could be soil health. The presence of soil microorganisms, aggregate stability, for example, compaction, any evidence of organic matter depletion, evidence of wind or water erosion, visible concentration of salts or other chemicals, inefficient water use. So that goes back to irrigation and any evidence potentially that's impacting pollinators wildlife, or invertebrate species. And of course, air quality could be a potential issue. NRCS planners also take into account human considerations, and that's for you as the producer. What's the land use? Capital? Is there issues with labor? Maybe risk factors you're looking at could be a concern. Management levels, maybe shifting from one management level to the other. We all take that into account with this planning process we go through with you as the producer. So as we're planning with you, we try to look at your goals, your objectives, short term and long term, and we do a site assessment. And then talking with you, playing 20 questions, we might identify some things or resource concerns that you may not have picked up. So this is why we need your input, because maybe something that you didn't see, we can develop some planning alternatives and not just look at the high tunnel as one planning option practice. So your feedback is critical, very, very critical. So in terms of other planning considerations for high tunnels, how is the high tunnel oriented? Is it facing north-south, east-west? What are the predominant wind patterns? Because the other thing you need to think of is maybe you need to anchor that puppy either with cement in the corners or what I've been recommending, which is less expensive, using duckbill anchors. But if you found a manufacturer that makes a high tunnel that you like, look at the installation manual to see if they have an anchoring system in place already. So that's something to keep in mind. Of course, the soil types are going to be important too. What your water source is, the irrigation system, of course, your crop rotation, and keep into account roof runoff. We may occasionally get a monsoon, winter seasonal rains. That water is coming off the roof. And you need to think about maybe a drainage plan. Get the water away from your high tunnels and away from your other crops. In this particular scenario, there's two high tunnels facing north-south, if you can see my cursor. And of course, these are the open beds on this particular plot. These were some of the first high tunnels. I worked with a producer and they cemented the anchor posts in concrete. So what are some options for high tunnels? Well, there's a few options to consider. There's the Quonset style or round style. As you can see, they can come in varying widths from as low as minimal as 20 feet and lengths. I've seen some installed up to 120 feet long. So it kind of depends on your work area that you have. Typical height is about 12 feet at the center of the arch. The rafter spacings right in here is between 4 to 6 feet. This is more of the traditional style or Gothic style. It's usually 14 feet at the center. Again, widths are as minimal as 20 feet and going up to 96 feet in length. One thing to think about is there's no engineering requirements by NRCS for this particular practice, the seasonal high tunnel. So make sure you're working with a manufacturer that has a good warranty. Now, another style is called the caterpillar style. It tends to be lower to the ground. The widths are between 14 to 16 feet, and the center height is between 8 to 10 feet, depending on the manufacturer. Now, those tend to be 50 to 100 feet long, and the rafter or bow spacing is about 4 feet as well. Again, it's preference. We're not going to force anything on you. What you like is what you should order. Now, the last one, which I haven't seen installed before or yet, is a rolling style of high tunnel where a track is built in the field, but you have the option of moving that high tunnel to different parts of your growing beds. It's 12 feet high at the center, usually 30 feet wide, with lengths up to 84 feet in length. Now, typically with the high tunnels, I would definitely suggest purchasing or seeing if the manufacturer includes shade cloth. Usually they will also include 6 mil plastic. And for winter locations, you need to also take into consideration a snow load, that the framing can handle that snow load as well. Now, usually we have this practice lifespan at about 5 years, which is about the time the 6 mil plastic might have to be replaced. So keep that in mind with your budgeting as you go down through with your operation. Now, in terms of soils, we have all various types of soils in Arizona. For this particular example, it's more about for irrigation. The water holding capacity of what's called a contine clay loam, it can handle up to 0.35 inches of water um, within 38 inches. So with that being said, if you have a drip system where the intake rate of those emitters or the soil itself is about 0.3 inches per hour, you can apply 0.35 inches of water to that soil. You will be getting about saturating almost that entire profile. What would you really want to do? I mean, the idea would be to irrigate within the root zone of your crop where you're getting the most benefit of nutrient uptake and oxygen uptake as well. Again, this is just one example. Now, when working with NRCS, and you might be thinking about an irrigation system in your high tunnel, um, the planners may use a high consumptive use crop, such as watermelons or peppers, where the total consumptive use is about 20 to 26 inches. Now, that may exceed the standard minimum flow or of 10 gallons a minute. So I would suggest using more of an average consumptive use variable. So then we're not going too low and we're not planning too high if NRCS is designing the drip system. But if you have 30-inch wide beds and your spacing of the emitters is about 8 inches apart, you're going to need about 1.2 to 1.5 gallons per minute per growing bed. This is just a typical overhead view of a drip system layout. You have your lay flat hose, you have your Y filter, pressure regulator. Might be useful to have a pressure gauge on as well to see what the pressure is. Typically, the lay flat hose is about 1 inch. And then your drip tape connectors are in each growing bed between 3 to 4 drip tapes at about 7.5 inches apart. And that's your 5/8 inch wide drip tape with the built-in emitters at your choice. And those numbers of the built-in emitters will dictate how much flow you will actually need for your particular high tunnel system. One of the other planning considerations mentioned earlier, this is the same location with the high tunnels. It's just shifted east-west, but my cursor going toward the left is north, but the arrows in blue are showing the drainage pattern of water when it rains. And for this particular scenario, that was that image I showed first. All the water ends up in a conveniently built retention basin. And the idea is to get the water to move away from your high tunnels and your growing beds if necessary. I mean, if you plan other high tunnels in some of your open beds, at least you have a drainage plan in place for those future considerations. Something else to think about, but with the shift of our monsoonal patterns, this may not be an economical option, but you can capture the roof runoff from rains events into a storage tank and then irrigate your crops or supplement irrigate your crops under the high tunnel. So in summary, all of our programs and services are voluntary. For Farm Bill financial programs, there is a formal sign-up period where you can apply. And in most cases, you can apply at any time of the year. And if it's in a current funding cycle like we are now, we can start the planning process this year in preparation for the next funding cycle, which would be 2026. Keep posted to social media, newspaper, or USDA NRCS websites for potential program sign-up announcements. You can contact the local field office or service center in your area as well. There's some eligibility requirements for our financial programs, but the main focus of this presentation was to think about the planning considerations as well. One final note, if cost is a concern, if you've been doing research for high tunnels, you may want to think about low tunnels as well. They can be another effective tool to consider for extending the growing season and for addressing plant productivity and vigor. I am going to stop sharing and we're ready for some questions, Tiffany.
Awesome. Well, if anyone has any questions or if anyone's like trying to accomplish a goal with hoop houses or high tunnels, Phil is one of the best experts that we know, and he's here to help. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. If you have anything specific that you're wanting to know, please ask. Now is the time to do it.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you were talking about emitters before with drip tape. I guess it's a couple questions, but so when purchasing your drip tape, and it might be obvious, but is there like a gallons per minute per emitter? Is that kind of like what you're looking for, the technical specs of that particular drip tape to kind of measure that out? And then like, do you have to then take the gallons per minute of each emitter for the number of feet that go down the bed? Does that have to add up to a total of 10? Or does each emitter itself, because there's like, like on 50 feet, there could be like 50 emitters.
Good question. So I happen to do all the calculations. That's why I came up with those numbers. So
Okay.
the emitters, the drip tape with built-in emitters, depending on the manufacturer, will show in their specification sheet what the output per emitter is in terms of gallons per hour. So whether the spacing of those emitters is a foot, 8 inches, or I think as close as 4 inches, then you have to take into account the total number of emitters in one lines. So if you have three, okay, so if you have three 96-foot long drip tapes on your bed, then there's a little formula that you just multiply. So it's the total number of emitters. So then you also look at the spec sheet because some of the emitters might be 0.33 gallons per hour up to say 0.37. But then again, you have to look if there's an adjusting pressure rating. So the higher pressure, there might be ones that emit 0.45. So depending on that goal, once you calculate that total, you're converting gallons per hour to gallons per minute. And I try to get it down to on a per bed basis. So then I can say if 12 gallons a minute total flow is my goal, then if I'm irrigating or I need 1.2 gallons per minute per bed, then I know I need about maybe I can irrigate 5 to 6 beds at a time.
Okay. Very cool. And my other question is, what if someone didn't want to do drip and they wanted to do like a sprinkler system, like hooked up from the top or like wobblers or anything like that? Is that something that NRCS also will take into account when working with them on the system, or is it ideally drip?
I think ideally drip because certain crops don't like to, if you get the leaves wet, you're just kind of inviting other issues with insects or diseases like rusts or molds. So I would think drip would be the best option because it will be the most water conserving option too, considering
Yeah.
we're in a dry state.
Yeah. And I mean, you just mentioned it just a little bit at the end about considering instead of putting in like a high tunnel or a big caterpillar tunnel, for example, but like low tunnels. Can you explain what like low tunnels are and why they differ from wanting to put in like a bigger caterpillar tunnel or high tunnel?
Well, fortunately, low tunnels is a newer practice that NRCS has been working with. And I kind of like the idea of low tunnels because it's going to give you some flexibility on where you can move your frames. I mean, you can the practice standard does cite some specific requirements on what the frame or your hoops can be made of. So then you can lay either a insect fabric or plastic or shade cloth over specific beds. Again, it's paid for by per square foot, but I think if someone's crop budget or their budget might be limiting, that would be another option compared to a high tunnel, because as I mentioned early in the presentation, with some of our wind gusts that we get lately, if you're not anchoring that high tunnel, it's I've seen some significant damage just from social media from other states where it's devastating. And that's why, if it's cost shared by NRCS, that's why you need the manufacturer's warranty.
Yeah. Yeah. And by low tunnel, if anybody doesn't know,
Oh,
that's basically like a one bed or a two bed kind of hoop that goes over that, but you can't walk under it, right? Like it's pretty low as opposed to like a high
it's
tunnel.
right. I mean, the minimum requirements for a high tunnel is 6 feet and higher, while a low tunnel is about 5 feet or lower. So
Mhm.
I mean, one advantage of the low tunnels, if you think about it, if you make it about those hoops about 5 feet, you still have some options to maybe rig a trellising system.
Mhm. Mhm. And if
And
like
you,
if somebody was interested in approaching the cost share program, like what are some of the considerations that they'd have to take specifically for low tunnels or high tunnels?
the biggest thing is that we need NRCS planners need to be able to identify the resource concern or resource concerns that will so conservation practice such as high tunnel or low tunnel or low tunnels can will address that resource concern, because even if a small scale producer applies with a local field office, their application gets ranked, and that before any money is obligated, it goes through some extensive reviews to make sure the planning process was done right, the resource concern is being addressed, and the appropriate practice or practices are addressing those resource concerns. I mean, it's not like we're going out there and I want to get a high tunnel. Sure, no problem. We have to justify where these federal dollars are going. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And those resource concerns would be things like
the
water consumption and stuff like that.
inefficient water use,
Mhm.
soil compaction, and
Mm.
then we can even use a simple compaction meter to show what the uh, find where that restriction is and how much resistance we've found on that, because that can be documented on our within that benchmark condition. So
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
kind of things are important. And anyone that's thinking about applying, these Farm Bill financial programs are not grants. They are technically a financial agreement between you as a producer and NRCS, which means you have to install the practice. We do a construction check to make sure it meets our specifications, and then you get reimbursed.
Awesome. Awesome. And sorry, I have so many questions. Okay, so you said compaction, and I think that's a very interesting topic to bring up inside any low tunnel or high tunnel, right? Because it's covered and it's not exposed to its regular environment outside. I mean, what are the concerns behind compaction, like even nutrition or let's say it isn't really usually exposed to the same beneficial insects or anything of that concern. So like what advice would you have around kind of maintaining it over the years, in a conservational way?
Well, I know there's been some studies in Kansas where there's more of a seasonal winter cycle, freeze thaw. And even they noticed in Kansas that if they kept the covers on their high tunnels for an extended period, they saw a change within the soil biology. They saw a change with compaction, how the soils were responding to irrigation. So they did some tests where they took the covers off, the plastic and or the shade covers, and left them open during a winter season. So then that freeze thaw came in, and then they started seeing some adjustments with the soil biology. So with the intense temperatures we have here in the southern part of the state, I would think at some point in time we might want to uncover these high tunnels to allow some adjustment with the seasons. We're not going to get that freeze thaw effect, but we definitely need to be monitoring and scouting inside the high tunnels more for insects, along with, are we seeing any changes in compaction or aggregate stability as well?
So, does anyone have any questions for Phil? I could keep going. I'll pick this man's brain all day. He's so smart on the subject. Lena here says, great presentation, Philip. You gave me a new watering idea. I will try to run a few tests on two ideas before deciding. I got some good info today. So thanks, Lena.
Oh, I know Lene, so she's got my number, so I'm sure she'll be calling me.
Awesome, awesome. Do you have any sort of last advice or even like beginner advice on the topic to throw out there?
Well, if I know some people might be thinking about, I want to grow food just for my family and friends, or I'm thinking about going into small scale production and hopefully make a few bucks. If you're on the fence, start off small, seek out technical advice first, talk to your neighbors that maybe are have the green thumbs and see what's working for them. But until you get your hands dirty and see how your particular soils respond, maybe you have something in your backyard or in your farming area that they don't. So I treat every site differently and just not assume that what they do is going to work for me. Because depending on what you tend to do for, are you thinking soil health and organic production? So then you should be feeding the soil, keeping the soil healthy. So then you're not reliant on synthetic materials, which would not be allowed under the National Organic Program. So the premise there is if you have healthy soils, the plants are healthy, they can kind of stand up on their own 2 feet. Well, they don't have feet, but stand up on their own root systems and take care of themselves despite pest pressure. So,
Awesome. That's
yep.
good advice. Thank you. Right, all right.
Does anyone have any more questions for Phil today? Can pop them in the chat. Sarah, do you have any more questions for Phil?
I always have questions for Phil. Um, uh, I mean, you brought up organic, so then a ton more
Yes, I
questions
did,
came up.
because I'm also the organic champion for NRCS in the state. So,
Yeah. So then in an organic system, if you're like crop rotation and then cover cropping is kind of a thing on the NOP, is it common to do cover cropping, I guess, like in your high tunnel for like a round at some point in the season? And is that actually beneficial? And would you want to do that with or without plastic, maybe?
well, I mean, the idea with organic production, the National Organic Program looks at several things. And of course, they are encouraging crop production. Mulching is another one, composting. I would, I know of one case in Prescott Valley where they were finding some issues under a high tunnel growing ranunculus. And I know one of the things that they tried was growing tiff grass and buckwheat. So I would encourage it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and
I
that's like
mean,
to add to the nutrition of the soil or
well, the cover cropping, it kind of meets the soil health idea of you've got something growing in on your farm. Otherwise, you're covering it with mulch or you have crop residues from the prior crop.
Mhm.
Um, so you're providing an environment where those soil microorganisms have a food supply, whether it be from the root systems or from the decomposing matter from the plant itself, or the mulch or the compost. So you're providing a food source. So you're, like I said before, you're feeding your soil flora and fauna first, and then the plants the plants are secondary.
Mhm.
But
Mhm. Totally.
so yeah, I would encourage it. I mean, might as well try it,
Awesome.
see what happens.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe some chicken rotation in there too. That'd be fun.
I mean, if someone has chickens and they are using straw as the bedding material for the chickens, they just created their own perfect compost material. So
Very
if they
cool.
can,
Yeah.
between the straw and the manure and that, get that compost with enough moisture and oxygen, they should have a really good product that will be beneficial that they can return to their system.
Mm. That would be great, actually. That's a very good kind of rounded system. All your inputs kind of come from your farm. All right, cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for answering my questions again.
My pleasure, Sarah.
All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, then I would just like to say a big thank you to Phil for coming on this month's Urban Ag Hour. You shared some really wonderful information today, so thank you for that. Thank you everyone for attending this month's Urban Ag Hour. We hope to see you next month at our Urban Ag Hour, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again, Phil, and see you on the flip side.
My pleasure. Have a good day, everybody.
You too. Bye.
Bye.